glad you are here. Glad to have all of you. So, as you know, we are trying to conduct most of these discussions online now. And then what we thought that we're gonna create very short videos on these specific topics, not more, not less, but exactly how much is required to understand and get a good discussion on the screen. And later point of time, we're gonna have in-depth discussion as and when we meet. Right. So today we're gonna have a quick discussions on service level agreements. How do you define a service level agreements on cloud computing environment, and what are the basic phases, and what you're gonna actually have for that. Right. So let us quickly move down towards that and try to define what is service level agreement. Now, to define a service level agreement on cloud computing environment, as we know, this is also a software process, and every process do have multiple phases. As you know, for example, of your software development models, like waterfall model or RAD model or feasibility model or something, they do have multiple phases, and in every phase we're supposed to do something. Similarly, for service level agreement also, we do have multiple phases, and then let us see what are the phases are there, and in every phase what we're supposed to do. So the first phase what we have, it's called a feasibility phase, or you can also call it a feasibility analysis phase. The second phase is called onboarding. The third phase what you have is called pre-production. Fourth phase, it's called, of course, the production. Now, as you all know, in case of a software industry, whenever an application is live, that means when you have deployed the applications on a specific server, then that particular phase is called the production phase. And then the last phase, what you're gonna have is called termination. We're gonna understand what is it and how it is important. Right. So now let us understand what is gonna happen in this all 5 different phases and what exactly we're supposed to do in these phases. Right. In the complete process starts when a client comes and submits an applications to a data center owner, expecting to deploy these applications on the server so that it can cater all the benefits of a real server or a real cloud computing environment. The first thing to be understood is from your project experiences, by this time probably you have already learned that every application can have 2 types of requirements. The first type is called functional requirements, which is mandatory. And the second category is called non-functional requirement, which are some requirements which are good to have. Now, let me give you a quick discussion about it, a quick example as we are discussing this part. A functional requirement for an application is something, if I bring out an example here, I can say, can I go ahead and perform a login, or is login a feature function of my application? Then it's going to be a functional requirement. If I have to also define, can I log in to this application from using my Facebook account? That's going to also discuss as a non-functional requirement. So the functional requirements are the must requirements to have, and the non-functional requirements are some requirements which are good to have at some point of time, right? Now let us also define that this functional requirement and non-functional requirements will turn into some sort of requirement analysis, which can be physical or logical requirements. So now the first step gonna be where I have to have the first analysis to be done, where I supposed to do the feasibility analysis. From this particular application, I'm gonna try to figure out what are the requirements I do have, and from this requirement, whether these requirements are valid or possible to accommodate on a cloud server or not. If at all these requirements are not possible to be delivered from the data center end, then that's a straightforward no. and that requirement stops there. If at all the requirements are possible to be deployed actually, then I'm gonna call it a yes, and then the real discussion actually starts on that, right? Now, once I say yes, that means this requirements, whatever we have, that is feasible and with as it is the requirement from the customer or with a minor modification to that requirement, I can deploy it. So this is basically this discussion where we are as of now. This is my feasibility analysis, and there I can say yes, this is fine to go ahead with. Now, once I have this applications ready, from this particular application, based on the requirement analysis, we're gonna form the first level of service level agreement, the contract part. So there are all this functional requirement, non-functional requirement, how much is possible to be adopted, everything will be mentioned. Now, it's not that the SLA will be only decided by the customer or only decided by the data center owner. Once the service level agreements have been decided, we have to go ahead and showcase that one to the customers or to the clients. Now, if at a client to have a modification requirement, client will come back and tell to us, again, those valid, if at all those are valid requirement, we're gonna include into SLA. If at all those are not possible, not valid requirement, we're gonna discard that. And then this particular cycle must continue for some more time. Now, if at all we are in this particular phase, we will be calling it a onboarding, where we are actually discussing about the requirements. So once at the end of this particular phase, what we have, we'll be having our final service level agreements ready. Now, let me tell you a fun fact here. This is also not a very final requirement because it's not been physically tested. Logically, we know whether the service level agreements are possible or not, but as of now, we don't know whether they are realistic or not. Right. So the next step going to be, as you know, every software application, before we deploy it into a server, we always go ahead and try to have it a test phase for it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make one server ready. This particular server should be exactly configured as a real-time cloud server, as we get to see on the data centers. And then this particular application, whatever we are discussing now, whatever we have received from the customer, will be deployed on that. And then once again, on top of that, we will be having our service level agreements also deployed. Now, we're going to run this one. It's not our real production server. This is nothing but a testing server. During this testing phase, we're going to define like whether this particular service level agreement is performing all fine or not, whether there are some changes required for this SLA. Do I need to increase the level of this SLA? Like say, for example, I said every day for 2 hours, I'll be shutting down this application for some maintenance work, but in the real time, I'm gonna see like only 30 minutes is sufficient enough for that. So instead of 2 hours, I'm gonna include 30 minutes in my service level agreement, and that is how this actual thing is supposed to go ahead and do it out. So once this particular SLA is done, then at this level, we are in stage number 3, where we are calling it a pre-production. Once this pre-production is done, now I can say, yes, my application, my SLA is right now finalized and I'm ready for onboarding. I'm ready for production. So once again, I take this particular application along with the service level agreement, and we're gonna deploy that one to my production server, and then it will keep on running, right? Now, by this time, we understand that there are 2 parties which are discussing. One is the customer or the client who is having owner of the application. And on the other side, we have the data center owner who runs the data center. So this is for the application, and this side we have the data center. Right. Now, at some point of time, both the parties, either the client or the data center owner, might feel that we should go ahead and update the SLA, because maybe there is a specific need where that demands an updation, or we can also find out there can be a violation of this service level agreements by both the parties. So either the customer can think or find out a requirement for updation, or they find out a violation, or at the same point of time, the data center owners can also find out an opportunity or a scope to go ahead and find out a possibility for updation, or they find out a violation. At any of the given situations, if mutually both the party decide either of this case number 1 or case number 2, so temporarily they will terminate the service level agreement, and unless until a new service level agreement is been formed and deployed, this service level agreement will be called terminated. As we are in this particular phase, we will be having it as stage number 5. And of course, where this is everything is running and everything is fine, we can have it at stage number 4, which is our production. And then finally, we're going to have it in a termination. I mentioned there are 2 termination conditions: a requirement for updation, or some of the parties can identify a violation. Right. So that's all and all about a overall process for a situation where I can go ahead and find out what is a service level agreement and how do I do it, what are the steps for a service level agreement. And yeah, that's pretty much it, friends. We're going to have a further in detail discussions on this topic, where we can bring out a example of a service level agreement. We can try working it out, how is exactly supposed to go. Yeah, thank you very much. Subscribe to this channel and keep rocking.